save us, and that the Savior must be truly human. We don't want to let go of either of those truths, and we can't let the word become mean that we sacrifice either of those truths we already established. So the Word became flesh has to mean that the Word continued to be Word, but took to himself flesh. The Son of God remained divine, but took on humanity without ceasing to be divine. Now here's the second thing that the word became flesh doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that the Son of God merged, mixed, or mingled himself into human nature. God is God, and humanity is humanity. Jesus is both, but he's not a mixture or mingling of the two of them. Now, since you've lowered your standards, I'm going to give you another illustration. Here's some Play-Doh. All right. So let's let the golden yellow be the divine nature. Everyone make that jump? Good. And the blue here be the human nature. If I'm the incarnate Son, I have both natures. Easy enough, right? Here's the temptation, though. It's tempting to say he has the divine nature, Play-Doh, and he has the human nature, and that in the incarnation, you might, I'm going to illustrate the wrong answer. So like, don't write this one down and say this is how it works. This is, I'll stand over here. This is the bad one. Okay. When the human nature and the divine nature come together, it is not a matter of them morphing or merging, mingling, mixing, commingling. What will happen, I tested this at home and it takes like 45 seconds, so I'm going to like break into a vamp and entertain you. What happens if you begin with the yellow and the blue, the divine and the human, but you morph and mingle them into each other? You end up, eventually, as the clock runs out here, with, what is that? It's green. Is yellow still in there? I mean, after a manner of speaking, but you kind of lost it in the mix, right? Notice that what we need for the Word to become flesh is for the Savior to be both Word and flesh, not fluid. Right? This is an anti-green sermon, okay? We need to preserve the yellow and the blue, representing the divine and the human nature, and not let them mingle into some third thing, which could then be a competent Savior for all the green third things out there, but not for the human nature that we need to save. Also, I miss the divine nature. I kind of want it, but I can't have it back. There's no way of separating it from that. You see the problem? Now, that's one problem. I'm going to put this stuff back in the can, because somehow I've got to sort it back out for the second service. And this is like, I need some volunteers. Might need to send up a deacon beacon here and get some help. Okay. That's one problem. Instead of getting salvation for team blue, you've got salvation for the non-existent team green, because there's only one person on the entire team, and that's the God-man. That's a mess. But here's the real problem. It all started when I held up a can of yellow Play-Doh and said, "This is the divine nature." I wasn't struck by lightning for doing that, but it was so wrong. Like, for one thing, let's say that the blue Play-Doh is human nature. And then I hold up the yellow Play-Doh and say, "This is the divine nature." How big do you think the divine nature needs to be compared to the human nature? Right? You see the problem? So like, look around you. Look at the tall ceilings in this room and how big this space is. I would have to fill this entire room with yellow Play-Doh and then mingle the blue Play-Doh into it. Do you think that would effectively turn the Play-Doh in this room green? It would still be pretty yellow, right? What you'd actually have is the total loss of the human nature into the infinite divine nature. If they mingle, the divine nature just eats up the human nature. It's gone. It's like if I go down to the ocean and throw a bottle of ink in it. It's kind of a dumb thing to do. But in terms of parts per billion, I have not significantly affected the color of the sea, right? The ink's in there, but not in a way that makes a difference. That's what would happen to our Savior's human nature if it mingled with the divine nature. And in fact, obviously, just to help us think, I talked about filling this room with Play-Doh, but this room is finite. It's big but finite. I would have to take an infinite amount of Play-Doh and put one little can of human in it and expect that the human would still be there. That's a problem. So, become doesn't mean ceasing to be one thing and turning into another instead. Become doesn't mean Word and flesh merge into some kind of, what did I call it, flirt or wesh or something. It doesn't do that. But also it doesn't mean that the Son of God sent out some sort of a remote-controlled drone or an avatar and did this from a distance. He actually took up the instrument, which is his own human nature. You see that? The eternal Son of God, always being in fellowship with the Father and the Spirit, always having the one divine nature, took into union with himself the human nature and used it as the instrument of our salvation. Now that can sound impersonal, right? But notice, I'm saying it's not a drone, it's not a distance. If I go to the beach and dig a hole, I could dig a hole with the instrument of a shovel, and I'd be glad to have it to get more sand moved. Or I could dig a hole with the instrument of my hands, that is myself, right? The human nature of Christ is that kind of instrument. It's what the Son of God takes to himself, and it's him. If you come to the beach and break my shovel, I say, hey, you broke my shovel. If you break my hands, I have a whole different response because those are mine in a deeper sense, right? Hey, I was using that tool. That tool is me. How dare you? That's the kind of intimacy that the Son of God, the eternal Son of God, has with the instrument of the human nature that he takes up and in which he carries out our salvation. So, thank you for lowering your standards with me, as I think I was really clear on why, and it helps that we had earlier sermons on the divinity of Christ and the humanity of Christ. I can invoke all of those and say, had to be truly the Word, had to truly become flesh. And I even explained a little bit of how, mostly by explaining how not. Because there's still a mystery here, right? We're still eventually going to say, I cannot explain to you what it felt like for the Son of God to become incarnate and walk around experiencing human life as the eternal Son of God. I don't have access to that information. It's not in the Bible, and it wasn't in any theology class I ever took, except that one bad one, which I repudiated. We just don't have that kind of information. And I know there's lots of questions that all of this raises. I can open a can of Play-Doh, but I'm trying not to open a can of worms, right? I'm trying to illustrate what we can know with confidence about who our Savior is and what kind of salvation he carried out. Mostly it sounds like a lot of negatives. No morphing, no merging, no mingling, no drones, no remote control. But it's in service of one big yes. The Word became flesh. Tidings of comfort and joy. The reality and truth of the incarnation. It leaves us with a paradox that this one is both divine and human. But paradox is good. And Christmas hymns, you probably noticed, are full of paradox. We rejoice in them. We sing them over and over. We set aside this entire season to say all kinds of mind-blowing things about the one who is moving the forces of the universe around through his omnipotent power is rocked in a cradle. He's the king even in the manger because he was always fully God and fully man in the incarnation. The paradox is good. We sing these paradoxes, and they are priming us to believe the amazing truth of the incarnation. So we spent this morning thinking about it, but our faith is for more than thinking about. The Christian faith is for living, for accepting and receiving,